The air in the blue mountains hung heavy, a silence so dense it felt like invisible hands throttling my eardrums, choking the world into a suffocating stillness that made my skin crawl. I'd plunged deep into Washington's wilderness, far beyond the gravel roads where weekend warriors parked their gleaming RVs. Overpriced tin coffins stinking of stale beer and hollow bravado before the sun even crested noon. That wasn't my turf. This was my kingdom, raw and feral, untouched by their clumsy boots. The ridge I'd claimed was a brutal gash in the earth, a cramped ledge barely wide enough for my bivy sack, teetering like a vulture's perch over an endless chasm of pine and shadow. Hours ago, the sun had drowned below the horizon, clawing the last wisps of daylight into a bruised purple smear that hemorrhaged into a black, starless void. I'd glimpsed a few white-tailed deer earlier, their tails flickering like jittery phantoms in the twilight, but none worth the weight of lead, so I dug in. No fire, just me in the bone-chilling cold, gearing up to rise with the dawn and stalk deeper into the wild's heart. I'm no novice out here. Cut my teeth on a Montana ranch where the wind howled like a banshee, clawing through barn slats, where livestock taught me survival lessons no textbook could dream of matching. By 10, I'd mastered animal calls, tricked coyotes into chasing a dying jackrabbit's cry, lured elk with a bull's roar that echoed off the hills. I could tease apart a bird from a mammal by the way sound scraped the air, a blade-sharp skill forged in dirt and blood. It's not swagger, it's fact. Out here, you either speak the wild tongue, or it rips yours out. But that night, something snarled back, and its voice was a guttural riddle I'd never unraveled. It struck around 1 a.m. I jolted awake, my skull cracking open like someone had slammed a railroad spike through my temples with a sledgehammer's fury. Pain surged in waves, razor-sharp stabs that set my teeth grinding, followed by a taunting, fleeting reprieve before the next blow smashed down. I'd been religious about water, sipping from my canteen like a zealot at mass. Dehydration wasn't the fiend here. Sprawled in my bivvy, I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the agony to relent, when a new sound slithered through the darkness. A faint, hollow hum rolling down the mountainside above me, thumping like a war drum in the distance. My headache didn't ease. It was shoved aside, drowned by that noise sinking its claws into my soul. It wasn't an animal call, not any I'd tracked in decades of hunting. Too vast, too resonant, like it bellowed from the cavernous chest of some monstrous titan. But the rhythm was warped, too loud, too precise, looping in a cadence that felt machined, yet throbbed with a living pulse. I tried pinning it to a bird, some Washington aberration I'd missed in Montana. Maybe a rogue owl with a vendetta, or a nightjar spitting curses. My mind clawed for reason, but my gut kicked it away, screaming. The longer I listened, the deeper it burrowed, a sound that didn't belong in any natural order. It didn't roam, didn't drift, just crouched up there, maybe a quarter-mile upslope, its echo slamming off rocks and trees, wrapping the ridge in a strangling shroud. Too close, too damn close. By 2 a.m., I'd hit my limit. The headache was a jackhammer now, pulverizing my skull into dust, and that sound, it was dragging me toward a precipice I couldn't name, a black abyss I felt in my bones. I made the call, pack up and run. The trail I'd hiked in was a savage plunge, steep, studded with jagged rocks, a twisted ankle waiting to claim me in the dark. But I remembered a gated road just above my roost, a serpentine loop back to the main drag where my truck sat like a lifeline. Longer, yeah, but navigable, even if it meant marching straight into that noise's jaws. No choice left. I slung my pack on, checked my rifle, loaded, safety off, a cold comfort, and started the ascent. The night was a solid slab of black, the kind that gulps down your flashlight beam like a ravenous maw. Each step snapped through pine needles and loose shale, the racket loud enough to rouse the dead, or whatever skulked up there. And it heard me. The sound pivoted, not in position but in malice. It shadowed me, pacing my strides, always lurking 200 or 300 yards upslope. I'd hasten. It'd match me. I'd falter. It'd ease off, mocking. A twig cracked to my left, sharp as a gunshot, too damn near, and my heart rammed into my ribs like a trapped beast. I swung my light, the beam slashing the void, but it snagged only trees, their twisted branches raking the sky like skeletal claws. The air stank, sharp, metallic, a cocktail of blood and drenched soil that burned my lungs. My finger hovered over the trigger, itching to unload into the dark, to shred the tension suffocating me. I couldn't see it. That's what snapped me. Whatever it was, it stayed veiled, deliberate as a hunter cornering prey. Predators don't hide unless they're stalking, and I was turning into those deer I'd watched earlier, twitchy, hunted. My breath rasped in jagged bursts, my vision blurring. Not altitude sickness, not this low. Something else, something wrong. The headache fused with that sound, a relentless drumbeat hijacking my pulse. I stumbled, caught myself on a tree, its bark gnawing my palm like frostbitten fangs. The noise dimmed as I descended, but the weight of unseen eyes clung like wet rot, patient as a grave. I burst through the tree line, and the headache vanished, snapped off like a neck under the axe. I froze, chest heaving, braced for the next wave. Nothing. Just a silence so thick it gagged me. I lurched to my truck just before dawn, legs quaking, body drained like I'd clawed through a mire. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. Back home, I ripped through online forums, wildlife logs, anything to pin that sound. Bird calls, bear grunts, cougar shrieks, none fit. Half crazed, I typed Bigfoot call into the search bar. There it was, the same hollow, deliberate wail. My blood froze solid. I don't swallow Bigfoot tales, never have, never will. But I can't erase what I heard. I should have buried it, called it wind games or some uncharted beast. But I went back. A month later, same ridge, same cursed spot. Pride or madness, I had to know. The day was crisp, sunlight slicing golden ribbons through the pines, the forest floor a patchwork of decay and gleam. I retraced my steps, rifle primed, ears straining for any off-key whisper. The slope where the sound had rooted was a snarl of thorns and toppled logs, nature devouring itself. No stirrings, no tracks, no scat, just a squirrel darting off like I'd pissed in its coffee. I stood there, gulping pine-stung air, feeling like a jackass for coming back. Then the wind twisted, hauling a faint reek, sweet sour rot, like meat rotting under a merciless sun. I chased it, shoving through brambles that clawed my jacket like desperate fingers. The stench thickened, slathering my throat, until I staggered into a clearing. There, half entombed in leaves and dirt, sprawled a deer carcass, fresh, a day old, tops. Its throat was slashed, guts spiraling out in a wet, grotesque bloom glinting in the light. No claw marks, no teeth, just precise, surgical cuts. My gut churned. Predators don't sculpt like that. They tear, they ravage. This was a gift, a sick offering laid out for me. I recoiled, boots sinking into the sludge when it struck again. That sound, low, hollow, booming from deeper in the woods. My rifle snapped up, but my hands trembled too hard to aim. It wasn't close, maybe a mile off, but it was there, jeering. I bolted, branches flaying my face, fear's metallic tang flooding my mouth. The truck was my sanctuary, and I didn't stop until I was barricaded inside, engine snarling. I didn't look back. Weeks bled by. Sleep became a ghost. Every creak of the house, every rustle past the window sent me lunging for the rifle now welded to my bedside. I dug deeper. Old forums, local whispers, anything Blue Mountains related. In a 2003 thread, I struck pay dirt. A hunter's post, clipped and frantic. Same sound, same butchered deer, same crushing stare. He'd quit the place too. Last login, 2004. No trace after. I hunted his handle to an obit. Dead at 42, heart attack. No prior whispers of trouble. The coincidence gnawed like a starving rat. Then the dreams invaded, not nightmares, something fouler. I'd wake in my kitchen, knife clutched. No memory of the journey. The blade was always slick, streaked with a dark, stinking muck, copper and rot. I'd scour it clean, muttering about sweat or rust, but the filth slithered back. One night, I caught my reflection in the window. My eyes weren't mine. Too wide, too hollow, twin voids glaring from the dark. I went back a third time. Had to. The ridge beckoned, and it waited. I brought a recorder, a clunky 90s fossil, to trap proof. The forest was a crypt. No birds, no wind, just my boots cracking like thunder. I set camp, same spot, and hunkered down. Midnight ticked by. Nothing. I laughed, a brittle, bitter bark ricocheting off the rocks. Maybe I'd shattered. Maybe it was all in my head. Then the recorder flared on its own. Static hissed, then that sound, louder, closer, breathing down my neck. I spun, rifle raised, but the ridge was barren. The tape kept spinning, snaring something new. A voice, wet and garbled, like it choked on its own gore. You brought me, it rasped, looping like a broken record. My headache erupted, a white-hot spear through my skull. I dropped the recorder, grabbed my gear and sprinted. The voice hunted me, not from the tape, but from the trees, the rocks, the air itself. You brought me. I barely made it home. The recorder was gone. Ditched or snatched, I don't know, but the voice burrowed in, whispering through the pain every night. I quit hunting. Can't stomach it. The mountains stole something, or planted something I can't uproot. I found a photo from that first trip, crammed in my pack. Me, grinning, rifle slung, the ridge hulking behind. But there's a shadow, tall, smeared, ember eyes burning through the blur. I torched it. Didn't help. Last week, it closed in. Not the call, the voice. You brought me. Under the porch, in the walls, oozing through the cracks with that rot metal stink. I locked the doors, loaded the rifle, but it's futile. The headache's a ceaseless war drum now, pounding my skull to pulp. I don't know what it is. Bigfoot. Something ancient. Something I roused. It's here, and it's not leaving. Neither am I. Days later, my old ranch buddy Jake rolled up. Big, brash, the kind of guy who'd scoff at a ghost story, then double dog dare it to show up. You look like death warmed over, he said, chucking a beer at me. I caught it, let it sit, spilled everything, ridge, sound, voice, knife. He smirked, bravado thick as tar, but his eyes twitched. Sounds like you need a padded cell, not a brew, or maybe an exorcist. His dark humor was a flimsy shield, but I saw it buckle. I pleaded with him to steer clear of the mountains. He laughed it off. Jake went up there yesterday, called it a lark, said he'd record it, prove I'd gone loony. He's not back. Phone's dead. I found his truck this morning. A mile from my place, empty, keys dangling, a recorder on the seat. I played it. Static, then that sound, then Jake's voice, quivering, no trace of mirth. It's here. Oh God, it's cut off. Then that wet rasp. You brought me. Louder, closer, gleeful as hell. I smashed the tape, shards slicing my palms. The smell's in my house now, a choking fog. The rifle's loaded, but my hands are jelly. It's not just me anymore. I brought it, and it's spreading. That night, the power flickered, died. Darkness swallowed the house, thick and alive. The voice wasn't a whisper now. It was a growl, scraping from every corner. I barricaded the bedroom, rifle aimed at the door, sweat stinging my eyes. Something scratched outside, slow, deliberate, like nails on bone. Then a thud, heavy, against the wall. The stench surged, gagging me, rot and iron. A slaughterhouse miasma. I fired blind, the muzzle flash searing the dark, but the bullets hit nothing. Laughter slithered through the silence, low, wet, mine but not mine. Dawn broke, weak and grey. The door hung splintered, claw marks raking the wood, not animal, not human. Downstairs, my kitchen was a carnage tableau. The fridge gaped open, meat torn apart, blood pooling on the tiles. My knife sat in the sink, dripping red, though I hadn't touched it. Footprints, bare, too long, too wide, tracked through the mess, leading outside. I followed, rifle shaking, into the yard. The trees loomed, silent witnesses, and there, at the edge, stood a figure, tall, blurred, ember eyes boring into me. You brought me. It rasped, louder, splitting my skull anew. I ran back inside, bolted everything, but the walls groaned, buckling inward. My phone buzzed, Jake's number. I answered, trembling, static, then his voice, fractured. It's not just you, it's everywhere. A scream, then silence. The line died. Outside the ground trembled, low, rhythmic, like footsteps converging. I peeked through the blinds. Shadows moved between the trees, too many, too tall. Ember eyes multiplying in the gloom. The recorder from Jake's truck, I'd missed it in my panic, was on the table, intact, playing on its own. You brought me. Over and over, a chorus now, voices layering. Jake's, mine, others I didn't know. The headache exploded, vision swimming, and I saw it. My reflection in the window, eyes glowing red, mouth stretched in a grin I didn't make. The rifle clattered from my hands. The door burst open, wood flying, and they poured in. Blurred shapes, reeking of rot, chanting my words back at me. I'm writing this now, barricaded in the attic, the last scrap of sanity slipping. The house shakes, voices thundering below. The smell's unbearable, the pain blinding. They're not just here, they're everywhere, spreading from me, from that ridge. I brought them, and they're not done. If you hear this on No Sleep Nightmares Reddit, don't go to the Blue Mountains. Don't listen for the sound, because if you do, you'll bring them too, and they'll never let you go. And there you have it, the hunter's tale. A night where the Blue Mountains turned from a hunter's paradise into a haunting ground, leaving us wondering what, or who, really owns the wild. Did that eerie call crawl under your skin? I know it got me. If it did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're just getting warmed up, and I need you along for this twisted ride. Drop a comment too. Would you have stayed to face that sound, or run like hell? Your thoughts keep this nightmare alive. Now, let's shift gears. Our next story drags us from the depths of the forest to a quiet campsite, where two friends thought they'd found peace among the pines. But peace doesn't last when a mysterious figure steps from the shadows, blade in hand, slashing through their night and forcing them to flee. What happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Let's find out. The woods were our sanctuary, or so we thought. A jagged slice of wilderness gouged from the endless mountains that cradled our rural town like a possessive, brooding lover. Me and Eli, we'd been at this camping game since we were snot-nosed kids, sneaking away from the chaos of our teenage crew, 16 to 19-year-olds who figured bonfires and bottom-shelf whiskey were the pinnacle of defiance. That night, we craved something quieter, something that was ours alone. The usual gang was content to huddle around a fire pit a half-mile from town, hollering over each other like a pack of hyenas drunk on their own noise. But Eli had caught wind of a trout stream a mile out, nestled in a hollow where the fish supposedly leapt onto your hook like they were auditioning for a fishing show. We didn't need their racket, just us, a lean-to, and the promise of a haul worth crowing about. I'm the planner, Cole, the guy who maps routes with military precision, packs extra batteries like a doomsday prepper, and would rather gut a fish than waste breath on who hooked up with who behind the gas station last week. Eli's the flip side, wild-eyed, all reckless impulse, the kind of kid who'd jump off a cliff to test if he could sprout wings, then cackle like a madman when he smashed both legs. "Come on, Cole, it's a mile, trout paradise," he'd said, flashing that lunatic grin, his shaggy blonde hair flopping into his eyes like a golden retriever too lazy to shake off the rain. I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my brain, but I gave in. We didn't have a tent, just swiped one from the group. So we rigged the lean-to against a boulder the size of a pickup truck, its moss-slick surface cool and damp under my palm, like it was sweating secrets. The clearing was textbook perfect. A ring of towering pines standing like silent sentinels, their needles whispering cryptic murmurs in the breeze, the air thick with the earthy tang of pine sap and the musty weight of damp moss. Night dropped fast, a curtain of black slamming down over the world, the full moon clawing its way up to bathe the scene in a pale, ghostly glow that made the shadows twitch. The fire was our lifeline, a crackling pulse in the dark. I'd built it low, just enough to warm our hands, the embers glowing like the eyes of something lurking just beyond the light's reach. Eli was already out, sprawled in his sleeping bag, snoring like a bear with a head cold, his usual orchestra of grunts, wheezes, and the occasional snort that sounded like he was choking on his own tongue. Me, I couldn't sleep. Something felt off, a prickling at the nape of my neck, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting to exhale something nasty. I tossed another log on the fire, the flame spitting and hissing like a cornered cat, sending flickers of light skittering into the void. That's when I saw him. He stood at the edge of the clearing, maybe 80 yards out, a silhouette carved against the moon's pallor, motionless, too still, like a mannequin dropped in the woods by some sick prankster. My blood turned to ice, pooling in my gut like a lead slug, heavy and cold. I squinted, straining to make out his face, but the dark devoured it, just a broad, hulking shape, a black smear watching us. My mind churned. Hiker, hunter, some lost drunk stumbling from a backward still. But it was too late for wanderers, and he wasn't moving, just staring, a statue forged from the night itself. I didn't wake Eli, not yet. Didn't want to spook him over what might be nothing. I fed the fire, keeping one eye locked on the figure, my pulse thudding in my ears like a war drum. Then, quick as he'd materialized, he turned, melting back into the woods without a whisper of sound. No crunch, no rustle, just gone. I told myself it was a fluke, some weirdo passing through. but the unease stuck like a splinter under my skin, sharp and nagging. Sleep didn't come. I lay there, the fire's crackle my only tether. The wind's restless murmur coiling around me like a snake sizing up its prey. Then it came, a soft crunch. Footsteps, faint but closer, deliberate as a predator stalk. My heart kicked into overdrive, a frantic drumbeat slamming against my ribs. Another step, slow and measured, circling the clearing like a vulture tightening its spiral. I nudged Eli hard, my knuckles digging into his shoulder. He groaned, rubbing his eyes, still half lost in whatever dreamland he'd been snoring through. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice a taut wire ready to snap. He blinked, bleary and confused, but the panic in my eyes must have jolted him. He sat up, groggy but awake. Another crunch, nearer now, the sound slithering through the dark like a venomous hiss. We grabbed our flashlights, beams slicing the night like desperate swords, but they caught nothing. Just empty blackness stretching between the trees, a void that swallowed the light whole. "Maybe a deer," Eli mumbled, his voice thin and wobbly, dripping with doubt he couldn't hide. I didn't buy it. The air felt wrong, heavy, electric, like a storm about to crack the sky open and unleash hell. The sounds grew bolder, footsteps closing in, a rustle of fabric brushing branches, too human, too intentional to dismiss. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end like I'd brushed a live wire. After midnight, exhaustion must have overpowered the fear, dragging me under, because the next thing I knew, a sound tore me awake. A sharp, tearing screech, like metal claws ripping through flesh. I bolted upright, Eli mirroring me, his eyes wide with raw terror. It wasn't a zipper. It was a blade, slicing through the lean-to's tarp with surgical precision. My hand shot to his chest, gripping his shirt so hard my knuckles bleached white. And as he turned, I barked, "Run!" We didn't think, just moved. I snatched my knife from my pack, shoved the tarp aside, and we erupted into the woods, barefoot, branches lashing our skin like barbed whips. Behind us, heavy footsteps thundered, fast, relentless, a hunter's pursuit. He was chasing us. My lungs burned, a fire searing my chest, legs screaming as we crashed through the undergrowth, the forest a labyrinth of shadow and moonlight that twisted and turned like a living trap. A branch snapped behind us, too close, the crack echoing like a gunshot. But we didn't look back, couldn't afford to. My feet, numb from the cold, bled raw from rocks and twigs, pain a distant murmur drowned by the adrenaline roaring through my veins. We ran until our lungs threatened to explode, the footsteps fading at some point. Maybe he'd tired, maybe he'd toyed with us enough, but we didn't stop, kept plunging deeper, directionless, swallowed by the wild's gaping maw. The night stretched into an endless nightmare, every rustle a jolt, every snap a dagger to the nerves. We collapsed near dawn, too shattered to keep going, my body trembling like a leaf in a gale, feet a shredded, bloody mess. "We need the road," Eli rasped, his voice a ghost of its usual bravado, barely audible over the wind's low moan. The forest sprawled infinite, every tree a mocking twin of the last, but by sheer, dumb luck, we stumbled onto a path as the sun clawed its way up, its light surreal and cold after the night's terror. Even in daylight, the woods felt wrong, tainted, pulsing with something unseen, something that watched from the shadows. We limped back to the lean-to, finding it gutted, tarp slashed to ribbons, our gear strewn like the innards of a butchered animal, part of it smouldering in the fire's ashes, the acrid smoke stinging my nose. We grabbed what scraps we could and bailed, never breathing a word to anyone, Who'd believe us? We swore off camping, but that guy, he's still out there, a shadow biding its time. Days later, the nightmares sank their teeth in. I'd wake gasping, the sound of that blade tearing through tarp echoing in my skull like a banshee's wail, my hands clawing at sheets drenched in sweat that reeked of fear. Eli clammed up, wouldn't talk about it, his usual grin replaced by a hollow, haunted stare, like something had scooped out his soul and left the husk. I tried to shake it, to bury it under routine, but the forest wouldn't let go. A week after, I found a scrap of tarp in my pack, torn, stained with something dark that stank of rust and decay, a sour, metallic rot that made my stomach lurch. I hadn't packed it. My knife was gone too, swapped for a rusted blade I'd never laid eyes on, its edge notched and jagged like it had carved through bone, or worse. I went back, alone, stupidly, to that clearing. Had to know, had to face it. The boulder loomed silent, the fire pit a cold, dead scar, but the air buzzed, thick with that same wrongness, a hum that vibrated in my teeth. Footprints circled the site, bare, too big, too fresh, pressed deep into the mud like a taunt. Then I saw it, scratched into the boulder, deep and jagged. The words, "You ran," gouged out in crude, angry strokes. My stomach plummeted, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. I bolted, legs pumping, but the woods weren't done with me. That night, my window rattled, a slow, deliberate scratch, dragging across the glass like nails on a coffin lid. I yanked the blinds, nothing but an abyss of black, and a faint whiff of rot seeping through the frame, curling into my lungs like poison. Eli called 2 days later, his voice a trembling wreck. "Cole, it's outside my house." Before I could spit out a word, a scream shredded the line, high, guttural, inhuman. Then static swallowed it. I raced over, tires screeching, heart hammering. His place was a war zone. Windows smashed to glittering shards, blood streaking the floor in thick, wet smears. But he was gone. A note sat on the table, scrawled in red that glistened like it was still fresh. "You can't run forever." My knife, the one I'd lost, was pinned to it, blade sunk deep, dripping crimson onto the wood. I locked myself in my house, rifle loaded, but the scratching's louder now, circling, a relentless tattoo against the walls, the smells inside, rot and blood, a choking fog that coats my throat. Last night, I saw him through the window, tall, blurred, eyes glinting like wet coals in a face too shadowed to read, holding Eli's jacket in one gnarled hand. He smiled, too wide, too wrong, a grin that stretched beyond human limits. The power's flickering now, the house groaning under some unseen weight, boards creaking like they're about to snap. Footsteps thud overhead, slow, deliberate, pacing the roof like a predator mapping its strike. My phone buzzed, Eli's number flashing on the screen. I answered, hands shaking. Just that wet, tearing sound, metal through meat, then a laugh, deep, hollow, echoing like it came from a bottomless pit. The lights died, plunging me into black. Something's at the door, scratching, pounding, whispering my name in a voice that's not human. A guttural rasp that slithers under my skin. I'm writing this as it breaks through, wood splintering with a shriek, the stench flooding in like a tidal wave, rotting flesh and rusted iron, thick enough to gag on. But it didn't stop there. The door gave way, and I fired, blind, wild. The rifle's roar deafening in the dark, muzzle flashes painting the room in staccato bursts. Bullets punched through walls, glass, air, but hit nothing. The laughter came again, wet and close, bouncing off the walls like it was inside my skull. I scrambled back, tripping over furniture, my bare feet slipping in something slick. Blood. Water. I couldn't tell, didn't care. The air was alive, buzzing with that electric wrongness, and the shadows moved, sharp, jagged shapes, darting just beyond my sight. I hit the stairs, climbing on all fours, the wood groaning under me as the footsteps followed, slow and heavy, each thud a hammer blow to my spine. In the attic, I barricaded the trapdoor with an old dresser, its splintered edge biting my hands. The rifle's barrel trembled as I aimed it at the hatch, my breath ragged, fogging in the cold. The scratching circled below, walls, floor, ceiling, a symphony of torment that drilled into my brain. Then silence, sudden and suffocating, the kind that makes you dread the next sound. It came, a low, wet chuckle, seeping up through the floorboards like a stain. The trapdoor rattled, a single, violent shake that sent the dresser sliding an inch. I fired again, emptying the clip, wood exploding in a shower of dust and splinters. But the laughter only grew, louder, layered, voices piling on voices, Eli's among them, twisted and wrong. I reloaded, hands fumbling, when the floor buckled, cracked like brittle bone, a jagged split racing toward me. I leapt back, slamming into the wall as something punched through. A hand, gnarled, too long, fingers black and glistening like they'd been dipped in tar. It groped, clawing the air, nails scraping wood with a sound like knives on slate. I swung the rifle like a club, smashing it down, bone crunching under the blow, but it didn't flinch, just kept coming. More hands breaching the floor, the walls, the ceiling, a writhing mass of limbs that reeked of decay and purpose. The attic was shrinking, the air thinning, every breath a fight against the stench. Rotting meat, blood, and something older, fouler, like the earth itself had vomited it up. I hacked with the knife, the rusted one from my pack, slashing at the hands, black ichor spraying, burning my skin where it hit. They recoiled, but more took their place, faster now, a tide of flesh and malice. The trapdoor blew apart, the dresser flying, and he rose through it. Not a man anymore, but something else. Tall, blurred, a mass of shadow and sinew, eyes like molten embers, that too wide grin splitting a face that flickered between human and nightmare. Eli's jacket dangled from one claw, shredded and soaked red. You ran, it rasped, voice a chorus of the damned. Eli's woven in, pleading and laughing at once. I lunged, drove the knife into its chest, or where a chest should have been. It sank deep, black ooze bubbling out, but it didn't fall, just laughed. A sound that shook the house, windows shattering downstairs in a chorus of glass. The hands grabbed me, cold, wet, impossibly strong, dragging me down as I screamed, thrashing, the blade slipping from my grip. The last thing I saw was those eyes, burning into mine, and that grin stretching wider, splitting its face into a gaping maw. I woke up, somehow, sprawled in the clearing. Dawn's light weak and grey overhead. The lean-to was gone, the boulder scarred with fresh claw marks, the ground littered with our gear, or what was left of it, shredded, blood-soaked, reeking. My rifle was there, bent like a pretzel, useless. My hands were raw, crusted with that black ichor, the smell clinging like a curse. Eli's gone, no trace, just that jacket, now pinned to a tree with my knife, the note from his house fluttering beside it. You can't run forever. The town's quiet now, too quiet. People are vanishing, one by one. Their homes left trashed, blood-streaked, empty. The woods hum at night, that wrongness spreading, footsteps circling houses, windows rattling. I hear it, him, them, every night closer, the scratching a relentless promise. My phone buzzes hourly. Eli's number, always that tearing sound, that laugh. Last night, I saw them. Shadows in the trees, tall and blurred, ember eyes multiplying, grins stretching wide, the power's out, the house trembling, the stench everywhere, rot, blood, and something ancient, awake, hungry. I'm in the basement now, barricaded, writing this as the walls shake, the floor cracks, hands breaching through. The rifle's useless, my knife's back, rusted, dripping, on the table, though I didn't bring it here. The chorus grows, you ran. Eli's voice leading it, twisted, gleeful. They're not one anymore, they're many, spreading from that night, from me. If you're hearing this on No Sleep Nightmares Reddit, don't go to those woods. Don't listen for the steps, the scratches. They're not human. There's something else, something I woke, and they're coming. For me, for you. Run while you can, because I can't anymore. Wow, those two friends didn't sign up for that kind of camping trip, did they? A slashed tent, a shadowy stranger, and a chase through the dark. That's the stuff that keeps you checking your locks at night. How's your heart rate after that one? If it's racing like mine, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button to join the No Sleep Nightmares Reddit crew. We're a family of thrill seekers here, and I want to hear from you. Comment below. Would you have fought back, or kept running until your lungs gave out? Your reactions fuel these tales. Next up, we're staying in the wild, but the stakes are climbing higher. Picture a lone camper, caught in a pavilion as a storm rips the world apart, only to find they're not alone. A black bear, driven mad by the chaos, turns a night of survival into a standoff with claws and teeth, ready to feel the storm's bite. Here we go. The forest had always been my refuge, a sprawling cathedral of pine and silence, where I could escape the buzzing static of the world, until that night turned it into a cage, its bars forged from wind and claw. I'd pitched my tent inside a single-walled pavilion deep in the Washington wilds, a crumbling relic with a cement slab floor and a slanted roof sagging under decades of neglect, its open sides framed by rusted beams that groaned in the wind like the dying gasps of some ancient beast. It wasn't much, more of a glorified lean-to than a proper shelter, but I figured it'd keep the worst of the weather off me and my gear, a flimsy shield against whatever the sky decided to hurl down. The forecast had muttered something about a storm, a vague whisper I'd shrugged off with the arrogance of someone who danced with nature's tantrums before. I'm no stranger to roughing it. Years of solo treks had taught me how to weather rain, wind, even the occasional sleet that stung like needles. I'd face them all and come out grinning, a little battered but unbroken. So I set up, the tense nylon rustling against the concrete with a dry, papery hiss, the air thick with the sharp, resinous bite of pine and the damp, loamy scent of earth waiting to guzzle the sky dry. I'm Riley, stubborn as a mule, meticulous to a fault, the kind of guy who triple checks his knots and keeps a mental tally of every twig snap in a 5-mile radius, cataloguing the wilderness like it's a puzzle I've already solved. My old man used to call me the human compass, though he'd laugh through his tobacco-stained teeth and say I'd still get lost in my own head, chasing shadows no one else could see. Out here, I thrived on control. Every step mapped, every risk weighed, every contingency planned down to the last matchstick. That night, though, control slipped through my fingers like wet sand, dissolving into the chaos that swallowed me whole. The storm hit late, a freight train of wind barreling through the trees, bending them low until their branches clawed at the ground like desperate, skeletal hands grasping for mercy. Leaves tore free, whipping past the pavilion like shrapnel, their jagged edges slicing the air with a high, keening whine that burrowed into my ears. The sky split open with a crack, rain hammering the roof in a relentless tattoo. Each drop a gunshot ricocheting off the cement, the sound building into a deafening roar that drowned out my thoughts. I huddled in my tent, the fabric trembling under the onslaught like a living thing. The world outside reduced to a grey blur of violence and noise. Then I heard it, beneath the storm's feral howl, a faint tapping, irregular and sharp, like pebbles skittering across the slab in a disjointed rhythm. My breath caught, a cold prickle racing up my spine, sharp as a blade's edge. At first, I chalked it up to debris, the wind tossing sticks and stones in a cruel game of catch. But it grew louder, more insistent, a clicking that sliced through the gale's roar like a knife through flesh. I unzipped the tent flap, fingers fumbling on the cold metal, and peered out, flashlight beams stabbing into the dark like a desperate plea. The light caught something. Movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the pavilion's edge, fluid and wrong. My gut clenched, a vice of ice tightening around my insides. Not debris, claws, clicking against the concrete, steady and deliberate. A predator's metronome. A black bear, big, hulking, its fur matted with rain, lumbered into view, eyes glinting like wet obsidian in my beam. Twin voids that swallowed the light and spat it back twisted. It wasn't just any bear. This one was pissed, its snout twitching with every huffed breath, clouds of steam billowing into the frigid air like a dragon gearing up to spit fire. I've had bears sniff around my camps before. Usually, a few guttural yells and a clang of pots send them scampering back into the brush, tails tucked like scolded dogs. They're cowards at heart, more afraid of me than I ever was of them, their bluster crumbling under a loud enough shout. But this one was different, a beast forged in the storm's crucible, riled up and frantic, trapped in the pavilion with me as its unwilling cellmate. It paced, claws ticking a maddening beat, closer, then further, then closer again, circling my tent like a shark sizing up a flimsy raft, each step a promise of violence. Its breath came in sharp, angry puffs, the sound wet and guttural, a primal growl mingling with the wind's banshee wail, reverberating in my chest like a second heartbeat. The air turned sour, musk and wet fur, a thick primal stench that clawed down my throat and settled heavy, coating my lungs with every shallow gasp. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loud, heart pounding so hard I swore it'd betray me, a traitor drumming out my fear for the bear to hear. The storm didn't let up, it got worse. A relentless monster clawing at the world, trees cracked in the distance, splintering like bones under a sledgehammer's blow, their thuds shaking the ground beneath me, vibrations rattling up through the slab into my spine. The bear flinched at each crash, its pacing growing erratic, claws scraping louder, faster, a frantic tattoo that drilled into my skull like a dentist's tool gone rogue. Every few seconds, it'd dart out into the rain, a black blur vanishing into the deluge, only to lunge back moments later, more agitated, more unhinged, like the storm was a whip cracking across its back, driving it mad. I sat frozen, one hand gripping the hunting knife I kept stashed in my pack, the blade's cold steel a flimsy lifeline against the chaos closing in. My palms sweated despite the chill, slicking the handle, and I fumbled with a roll of duct tape, ripping strips with my teeth, the bitter adhesive stinging my tongue as I wrapped it around my hand and the knife until they were fused into one desperate weapon. If that bear came through the nylon, I wasn't going down without a fight, though in my head, I was already half laughing at the absurdity of it all. Death by bear in a tent? That's a headline even I'd read, I thought, a grim chuckle dying in my throat, smothered by the weight of the moment. Minutes bled into hours, time stretching into a torturous haze where every second dragged like a rusty blade across my nerves. The storm raged, a beast of its own, the wind screaming like a choir of the damned, trees snapping closer now, their crashes rattling my bones with a visceral shudder. The bear kept circling, its presence a heavy, suffocating weight, pacing, huffing, claws clicking in that maddening, relentless loop, a sound that burrowed into my brain and gnawed at the edges of my sanity. My flashlight flickered, batteries gasping their last breaths, and I cursed under my breath, switching it off to save what little juice remained, plunging myself into darkness thick and absolute. The bear's noises sharpened in the void, every huff a guttural snarl, every scrape a promise of jaws and claws waiting to rend. I clutched the knife tighter, duct tape cutting into my skin, the pain a distant anchor as I waited, listened, prayed the storm would tire before I broke. Then it shifted, not the storm, the bear. A low, rumbling growl rolled from its throat, closer than before, the sound vibrating through the slab into my spine like a warning shot. I flicked the light back on, beam trembling as I aimed it, caught the beast mid-step, inches from the tent, its snout twitching, eyes locked on me with a predator's focus. My breath hitched, a scream clawing up my throat but dying silent, trapped behind gritted teeth. It reared back, then charged, stopped short by a thunderclap that shook the pavilion, the roof creaking like it had collapsed under the weight of the sky. It spun, lumbering out into the rain again, a black shadow swallowed by the deluge, but this time it didn't return right away. I exhaled, shaky and ragged, the knife still fused to my hand, my pulse a jackhammer in my ears, drowning out the storm's fading roar. Dawn crept in, grey and weak, the storm finally easing, wind softening to a mournful sigh that whispered through the broken trees. The bear was gone, or so I thought. I unzipped the tent, stepping out onto the slab, legs wobbly as a newborn colt's, knees threatening to buckle under me. Tracks circled the pavilion, deep claw gouges in the concrete, too close for comfort, a map of my near-death etched in cold, unyielding stone. The forest was a war zone, trees snapped like matchsticks, branches strewn like the casualties of some unseen battle. The air heavy with the reek of wet rot and ozone, a sour tang that clung to my tongue. I packed up fast, hands shaking, the knife still taped to my palm. I wasn't risking a damn thing. That's when I heard it, a low huff, not far off, lurking behind the trees. My head snapped up, eyes scanning the shadows, but the woods were still, too still. A silence that pressed against my chest like a warning. I bolted, gear half stuffed into my pack, the pavilion shrinking behind me as I sprinted for the trailhead, boots pounding the mud, the sound of my own ragged breath chasing me through the trees. Back home, I thought it was over. Bear, storm, done. A nightmare boxed up and buried. But the nightmares wouldn't quit, sinking their teeth in deep. I'd wake soaked in sweat, the clicking of claws echoing in my skull like a relentless drum, the stench of wet fur clogging my nose until I gagged. My knife, still taped from that night, a memento of survival, went missing a week later, replaced by a claw, black and curved, sitting on my kitchen counter like a grim trophy. I hadn't brought it, couldn't have. The pavilion's claw marks haunted me, burned into my mind like a brand, so I dug. Old ranger logs, local tales, anything to make sense of it. Found a report from '98. A camper vanished from that exact spot. Tent shredded to ribbons, tracks everywhere, no body recovered. Last entry in the log, scribbled in a shaky hand. Heard something circling. Bear, maybe more. The ranger quit after that. Disappeared into obscurity. No trace of where he'd gone. Then my sister Mara, loud, fearless, the kind of gal who'd punch a bear square in the snout and call it a warm-up, rolled into town. "You look like roadkill scraped off the highway," she said, tossing me a coffee with a smirk. Her dark hair wild and tangled from the drive, a storm of its own. I spilled it. Pavilion, storm, bear, claw, the whole damn mess tumbling out in a rush. She laughed, sharp and bright, a sound that cut through my gloom like a blade. "Sounds like you pissed off Yogi's evil twin. Let's go back. I'll scare it off with my charm and a right hook." I begged her not to, voice cracking with desperation. But Mara's a freight train. Once she's rolling, you're either on board or flattened. She wouldn't hear it, already halfway out the door, her grin daring me to stop her. She went yesterday, solo, said she'd record it, prove I was just paranoid, a scaredy cat with a compass. She's not back. Phone's dead, silent as a grave. I found her truck this morning, a mile out from the house, empty, keys dangling in the ignition, recorder perched on the dash like a taunt. I played it, hands trembling, wind howling, her laughing. "Come on, bear, show me your moves." Then claws, clicking sharp and fast, her voice cracking mid-sentence. "Riley, it's not..." Cut off by a scream, raw and guttural, swallowed by a growl, wet and deep, that sank into my bones. Then a new sound, a voice not hers. "You stayed." My blood froze, a chill spreading from my core, the coffee cup slipping from my grip to shatter on the floor. The smell hit, wet fur, rot, inside my house now, seeping through the walls like a plague, curling into every corner with a sour, suffocating weight. Last night, the power died, plunging the house into a black so thick it pressed against my eyes. Scratching circled, walls, roof, windows, a relentless siege that clawed at my sanity, each scrape a promise of what was coming. I locked myself in the basement, rifle loaded, barrel trembling as I aimed it at the door, my breath fogging in the cold, shallow and ragged. The floor trembled, cracks spidering out like veins, the concrete groaning under some unseen force. Claws breached through, black, too many, gripping, pulling, their wet sheen glinting in the dim glow of my dying flashlight. The recorder flared on its own, static hissing. Then Mara's voice, twisted, warped. "You stayed," layered with others, a chorus of the lost. Voices I didn't know but felt in my marrow, pleading and laughing in a cacophony that split my skull. The air thickened, fur, blood, decay, a choking fog that burned my lungs with every gasp, the stench of something ancient and awake. I fired. The rifle's roar deafening in the tight space, muzzle flashes painting the basement in stark, flickering bursts. Bullets punched through the claws, black ichor spraying, but they didn't stop, didn't flinch, just kept coming, more breaching the walls, the ceiling. A writhing tide of limbs that pulsed with malice. The door buckled, wood splintering with a shriek, and shapes poured in, tall, blurred shadows given form, eyes glinting like molten embers, grins too wide, splitting faces that flickered between human and nightmare. One held Mara's jacket, shredded and soaked red, dangling from a claw like a trophy. "You stayed," they rasped, a chorus that shook the house, windows shattering upstairs in a cascade of glass. the sound raining down like a death knell. I swung the rifle, clubbing at them, metal cracking bone, or what should have been bone. But they didn't fall, just laughed. A wet, guttural sound that burrowed into my brain and twisted. Hands grabbed me, cold, slick, impossibly strong, dragging me down as I thrashed, screaming, the rifle slipping from my grip to clatter uselessly on the floor. The basement shrank, walls bowing inward, the air thinning until every breath was a fight against the stench. Rotting meat, blood, and something older, fouler, a primal reek that spoke of graves long forgotten. I clawed at the concrete, nails splitting, but they pulled harder, their grip a vice of ice and rot, eyes burning into mine, grins stretching wider, splitting into maws that hissed my name. I woke, somehow, sprawled in the pavilion, dawn's light weak and grey overhead, filtering through the broken roof. The tent was gone, shredded to nothing, the slab scarred with fresh claw marks that spiraled outward like a ritual circle, deep and jagged. The forest was a slaughterhouse, trees snapped, branches strewn, blood pooling in the mud, the air thick with the reek of wet fur and decay, a stench that clung to my skin like a second flesh. My rifle lay bent like a child's toy, useless, barrel twisted into a mockery of itself. My hands were raw, crusted with that black ichor, the smell seeping from my pores, a curse I couldn't scrub away. Mara's jacket hung from a beam, pinned with my knife, the one I'd lost, dripping red, a note fluttering beside it. You stayed, scrawled in crimson that glistened wet. The town's silent now, too silent, a graveyard hush settling over streets that used to hum. People are vanishing, one by one. Neighbors, friends, their homes left trashed, blood-streaked, empty shells where life once thrived. The woods hum at night, that wrongness spreading, footsteps circling houses, windows rattling like teeth in a skull. I hear it, them, every night, closer, the scratching a relentless vow, clawing at my walls, my sanity. My phone buzzes hourly, Mara's number, always that wet growl, that laugh, deep and hollow, a sound that promises more than death. Last night, I saw them, shadows in the trees, tall and blurred, ember eyes multiplying, grins stretching wide, too many to count, a legion born from that pavilion. I fled to my friend Jake's place, big, brash Jake, the guy who'd laugh at a ghost story then dare it to prove him wrong, a bear of a man who'd wrestle the devil for a beer. You're cracked, Riley, he said, slapping my back, his voice a boom that shook the room. I told him, Pavilion, bear, Mara, the claw, the voices. He grinned, all teeth and bravado. Sounds like a party I wasn't invited to. Let's go kick its ass. I'll bring the shotgun. I pleaded, but Jake's a bulldozer. Reason doesn't stop him, only fuels the fire. He went this morning, said he'd record it. Show me it was just some dumb bear with an attitude. He's not back. His truck's outside my window now, empty, engine cold, recorder on the seat. I played it. Wind, his laugh. Come on, you furry bastard. Then claws, a scream, his voice breaking. Riley, it's not a... Cut off. That growl. You stayed. Louder, gleeful, a chorus swelling. The power's out, the house trembling, the stench everywhere. Fur, blood, rot. A tidal wave of decay that drowns me. I'm in the attic now, barricaded. Writing this as the roof buckles, beams snapping like dry twigs, claws tearing through, black, glistening, too many. A forest of hands reaching, pulling, the recorders playing. Mara's voice, Jake's, others, a legion chanting. You stayed, their laughter shaking the walls, glass exploding below. They're not bears, there's something else. Something I woke, something spreading. The town's gone, streets empty, houses dark, the hum everywhere, claw marks on every door. They're here, under me, through me, eyes glinting, grins splitting, the stench swallowing. If you hear this on No Sleep Nightmares Reddit, don't go to that pavilion. Don't listen for the claws, the voices. They're awake, they're everywhere, and they're coming, for me, for you. Run, or stay, like I did, and join the chorus. And there you have it, folks. The echoes of the Blue Mountains still ringing with that unearthly call. The slashed tent left smouldering in the woods, and the pavilion claw marks deepening into something far beyond a bear's rage. But what ties these nightmares together? Is it just chance, or something darker stitching these threads into a tapestry of terror we're only beginning to unravel? The hunter's shadow, the stranger's grin, the growls that whisper your name. What's waiting out there, watching, growing? Stick around to find out, because this is just the start. If these tales made your skin crawl or your heart race, smash that subscribe button to No Sleep Nightmares Reddit. We're diving deeper into the abyss every week, and I want you with me. Drop a comment below. Which story's keeping you up tonight? Let's keep the nightmares alive together. See you in the dark, in